Well, welcome everyone. I am Stephanie Ludwig. I'm a project manager here at the Economic Growth Institute at the University of Michigan, and I'm joined here by my two colleagues, Vikesh and Parker. EGI has been working with small to medium-sized manufacturers across the state of Michigan for more than 38 years, and we are really excited to be here to host this financial training that is sponsored by our Regional Industry 4.0 effort that we have in partnership with the Manufacturing Growth Alliance to support small manufacturers in Southwest Michigan, Northeast Michigan, and the Upper Peninsula. Next slide, please. So today we are going to start with a super quick high-level overview of Industry 4.0 and then jump into the financial training So for housekeeping, we will be sending out the slides after the event. And we are recording it, so the recording will be available and it will be posted on the MGA website if you want to refer back to that. We do have your sound on, so you can ask questions, but if we would prefer if you put any questions in the chat, we can monitor that and then answer those questions, and we will have time at the end to answer questions. So next slide, please. So to start, what is Industry 4.0? It is simply the union between physical assets of your company and advanced digital technologies, and that could include any or all of the various technologies that you see on the screen. You may or may not be aware, the state of Michigan has developed a multi-pronged effort to support businesses along their digital transformation journey with a goal to ensure that 50% of all Michigan manufacturers will be prepared to adopt some level of Industry 4.0 by 2025. So in order to support manufacturers statewide, there are several resources available. Next slide. One is through Automation Alley. Some key things to note is that Automation Alley is doing leadership assessments. They also have a multitude of Industry 4.0 data and resources that are available to assist Michigan manufacturers, and through the statewide initiative are free. They are also hosting Integrate on May 10th, which is I think next Tuesday, which is a global conference on Industry 4.0 that all small manufacturers can get one free ticket to attend the event. The Michigan Manufacturing Technology Center is also doing technology assessments for small to medium-sized manufacturers, and they are hosting roadshows across the state featuring various technologies. Next slide. Regionally, in addition to hosting various trainings like this financial training, we have a series of educational webinars that are recorded along with an on-demand series that is currently available on the MGA website. And our goal is to introduce Industry 4.0 technologies that we have seen many of our manufacturing clients successfully implement and prove effective, that also include real-world applications from those manufacturers. So feel free to check these out at the MGA website. Next slide. So if you find that after today's presentation that you would like to do a deeper dive, our team can meet with you to do a free top-down analysis of your company that includes a very detailed financial analysis that will include a company valuation to help you better understand your company's value and any opportunities for improvement. Once that is done, the next step for companies that have financial stability and interest in adopting new technology, EGI can then conduct an on-site operational analysis that will look at 9 core areas of your business, such as leadership, planning, sales, marketing, operations, to further evaluate those areas of your business and then provide a leveled set of recommendations for high leverage points of Industry 4.0 technology. The next slide. So both that financial analysis and the operational analysis are free to you. That cost is covered by our grant. But for this initiative, we also have $10,000 of cost share funding that is available to a limited number of companies in those regions to use towards those recommended projects. The way that process works is that our team would find and introduce the best resources to assist your company to implement the project, and then our team would project manage its implementation alongside your company team. So if you're interested in more information on that deeper dive and the funding, we're happy to have a separate call to talk about what that looks like. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Vikesh.
Thank you, Stephanie. Great. Right before we jump into the financial analysis training here. We were expecting a few other people on the call as well. So Stephanie, today's call is essentially all clients of the program already. So we have done the financial analysis and I've shared the Excel document with them. And we've done the VOP operational analysis document as well. So, so Tammy, Kevin, and John, in case you haven't received those documents, let me know. It should be with, I should have sent it to either you or your associate that I was working with for the program. Perfect. So you should already have an Excel sheet. Thank you, Parker. In today's discussion, we're going to talk about cash conversion cycle. It's a metric that we use to measure cash flow for the company. And when I say cash flow, we're primarily focusing on operating cash flow. As you might know, there are three components of cash flow, which is operating cash flow, your financing cash flow, or how you raise debt, etc. And then you have your investing cash flows, where you put that money to use in terms of your CapEx. So today we'll focus on your operating cash flow and talk in terms of why it's important. Share a tool to measure cash conversion cycle. We'll share a simple tool over the call, but you already have a more in-depth tool, the tool as well, with benchmarks to cross-check it against. And we'll wrap up the discussion with some technologies and tactics that you could use to improve cash flow from an operating cash flow perspective. And some of the technologies that we'll give you are, in fact, some of the projects that you are individually looking at as companies as well. And kind of wrap it up with additional services and trainings. But I believe you're already, since you're all three are already clients of the program and we're working on projects, I think you're already familiar with that part of the process. Next slide. Thank you. So what is the cash conversion cycle? So I have a great graphic here that kind of describes this process. So it's a metric measured in days that it takes for your company to convert sales orders into cash. And just using the metrics within your income statement and financial, your balance sheet, you can convert those metrics into a measure in days to see the time that it takes between from when an order is placed to when you go out and buy those raw materials for that particular order, when you build out the product, and then when you finally sell it. So when you buy your raw materials, you spend a little money in terms of your cost of goods sold. And when you sell your product, you get your revenue, which includes a little bit of profit. I included the time of when you order as well, though that particular metric, the time that it takes in days for when or how much time you take to process an order is not typically included in your financial statements. That is something that you should pay attention to. For example, if you receive an order and you take 10 to 15 days to place that order into your system and order the raw materials, that is in fact adding to your cash conversion cycle. So that is something to pay attention to, is what is that lag between when you're receiving an order and when that order is being placed for raw materials. Next slide, please. So how important is cash conversion cycle? So I'll use a comparison here to kind of drive the point of why it's important and how important it is. So think of the tale of two companies. You have John's company and Ben's company. Both companies do exactly the same thing. You can in fact just think that they are located right next to each other, the same size. And both of them are starting off with about $1,000 in cash in their account. So with that $1,000, they go out and buy raw materials. They build their product and sell it for $1,200 in revenue. That turns into about $200 in profit. With that, they save $100 into their equity account. And then let's say they reinvest the $100 in terms of raw materials to buy the next set of raw materials, which is now for $1,100. So they go on through this cycle where they're slowly expanding, they're getting more revenue through the door, and they're expanding the company. The only difference, however, is that John's company does that entire cash conversion cycle from when they receive the order to when they ship it and collect the money. John's company does it in 30 days, whereas Ben's company does it in 36 days. So let's see, is this difference in time, how much money does it cost each company? Next slide. So on the left side, you have John's company, and on the right side, you have Ben's company. So we're looking at 4 columns here: the cost of raw materials, revenue, profit, and savings. And in the middle, you have the time column, and then you have the raw materials, revenue, profit, and savings of Ben's company as well. And each row is a cycle period. So initially, you have one cycle that's highlighted in gray. Then you have 180 days, which is about half a year, then 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and 5 years, and so on. So as you can see, in that first cycle, when it's just 30 days for John's company and 36 days for Ben's company, both of them do exactly the same in terms of profit and savings. However, when you look at 180 days or 1 year, and as you go down this, you can see that John's company is essentially expanding at a much more rapid rate. Just that 6 days of difference, you can see in terms of in 5 years, John's company is at a revenue of about 350,000. Whereas Ben's company is the revenue of 140,000. And this is completely self-funded growth. Apart from that initial $1,000 in raw material costs, every additional cost that they require for growing their company in terms of raw materials only is self-funded through their profits. They're not having to go out and get that extra line of credit. And there is an assumption here that savings is enough for their capital account to put towards capital expenditure for new machines for incremental quantities. So you can see the difference that over time, money compounds. And that's the key difference that speaks to how important it is to measure and manage your cash conversion cycle. So what have we kind of seen in terms of what are the benefits of cash conversion cycle? In the long run, we certainly know that it can lead to more revenue and profitability. And in another less paid attention to for small companies, but it's really important as well, is less dependence on short-term financing. Because as you might know from your individual lines of credit, that you generally get a slightly higher interest rate for your lines of credit, especially now when interest rates are increasing. And it might seem like a small price to pay in order to buy raw materials and deliver your product. However, over time, that interest rate is eating up into your profits. And this actually happens to be a key difference between small companies and large companies that can self-finance themselves, or small companies that go out to get short-term line of credits to finance their raw materials. Next slide. So let's go into measuring the cash conversion cycle. So as I mentioned earlier, the time that it takes in days from when you order your raw materials to when you collect your money from your customers can be measured in 3 key areas in your business. One is inventory, accounts receivable, and accounts payable. But the first and foremost important thing is when you look into your statement and you look at that these items on a monthly basis, you need to make sure that you can effectively measure it, or that they are being effectively measured. Because if you are as a company, you're not effectively measuring it, then you can't really manage it. Then you're looking to maybe manage it at the end of the year, just for your auditor's purpose, and you're not necessarily using that information to manage your business on a monthly basis for your cash conversion cycle. Next slide. The data needed to calculate your cash conversion cycle is just 5 items that hopefully is being tracked on a monthly basis in your company. Those are annual sales, or your revenue, your cost of goods sold, and your inventory. And some of you might already know that when you divide your cost of goods sold by inventory value or average inventory value, you get your inventory turns. Then you have your accounts receivable balance and accounts payable balance. So Stephanie's going to share a tool here in the chat. Since you already do have an RMA sheet that I've shared with you, or RMA analysis sheet that I've shared with you, but just for demonstration purposes, I'll quickly show you this tool as well that you can use. Parker, can I share my screen here? You can see this is an Excel sheet that we've shared with you. You won't be able to edit this sheet. However, you can go to File, make a copy, and create a local copy of this sheet. That way, you can put your information here on a regular basis and track this information. We've included a few other ratios here, such as current and quick ratios. These look at liquidity in the company and just your operating gross margins. Hence, it asks for other terms here, such as gross profit and operating income. But when you go in and input the information here on the left side, in this brown highlighted information, you get your output here in this particular column. And what I've included here is RMA data, or these are benchmark data to compare yourself against. because you can do two types of comparison in financial analysis. One, you can compare against your past performance and see how that is trending. And the second is you can compare against your industry peers. You can look at, for example, Kevin and Final Gravity Brewing. You can look at other brewing companies that are in your similar size to see how are they doing in terms of days receivable, days inventory, days payable, and cash conversion cycle. Now, you might not completely know how this is being calculated, so we'll just go ahead and give you a brief introduction to how those calculations are being made. But this is a tool that you can use on the site just to input your information. And similarly, you can do it for multiple years, or you can break it down by quarters and create copies of the sheet and see how it's trending, and kind of dig into what are those causes for each of those individual items over time. And as I've indicated, right, if the minute you're able to manage it on a regular basis, you can probably start to manage, you can try to make those incremental improvements, because even if you can improve it by a day, a month, that can create significant cash for your company. So I'm just going to put the slideshow here. So let's take a look at how these are calculated. So we measure it in terms of turns or turnover over a period of time. So your sales divided by your receivables. Your sales is an income statement item, and your receivables is a balance sheet item. You're typically taking your 12 months trailing sales, or your last previous 12 months sales divided by receivables. And here you got your data. This is some sample data for the 3 years. So you're seeing how many times your receivables are being turned over a year. Similarly, your cost of goods sold divided by your inventory is your inventory turnover ratio. And your cost of goods sold by your payables is your payables turnover ratio. And looking at this over time, you can see for this particular company, this example company here, over time, you can see the inventory has increased marginally. However, it's still much better. It's still turning over fewer times than the RMA, and similarly for payables. But the more important thing is to kind of convert this to days, because that way you can look at it's a more relatable term, because you can measure it in how many days you're holding your inventory. So when you divide these numbers, divide 365 by these numbers, you can convert your days into terms called your days receivable, days inventory, and days payable. And this RMA data is called data from the Risk Management Association. So they compile data from small businesses across the US. They segment them by NAICS codes, they segment them by revenue ranges, and they also, in some instances, segment them by the region where you are. So if you are a metal casting company with $50 million in revenue, you can look at aggregated information of 20 other metal casting companies with $50 million revenue, and you can see how you compete. This is important because you might, as a company, see yourself doing really well, but over time, do you remember the example that we used before of John's and Ben's company? Over time, one company is going to be much bigger, another company is going to be much smaller, and you generally see during times of recession, the companies that are stronger are always in a better position, a cash position to acquire the smaller companies. So it's important to measure yourself against industry peers and industry standards so that you are competing against your peers. A note about payables. So payables actually you can think of is somewhat as a source of cash, because the longer you take to pay your suppliers, the more of their cash you're holding on to, right? However, this is certainly not something that you can stretch to the extreme, because if you stop paying your suppliers, or if you stop paying your suppliers, or you take too long to pay your suppliers, they're going to give you the worst of terms. In some cases, they might even cut you off. But if you want to see how this cash conversion cycle, or the term that we initially introduced in terms of measuring your cash, it is your days inventory plus your days receivable and subtracting your days payable, because that's how much time you're holding on to cash of your suppliers. So the objective of managing this cash conversion cycle is reducing your days inventory. So any of the time that it takes for your inventory on hand, your work in process, your raw materials that you have So reducing your raw materials, reducing your work in process, so reducing the time your finished goods are being held on to in your company. Each of those is an important factor in reducing your days inventory. Days receivable, it's about how quickly you're able to collect payment on delivery of your product. And days payable, as we just mentioned, is how long it takes for you to pay your supplies after you've received your supplies. These are just some standard industry benchmarks, and that might not necessarily relate to your companies because you don't exactly do these things. But as I mentioned, the information is segmented by NAICS codes, and you can get average information for industry peers. In fact, even break it down by median, upper quartile, lower quartile. So as a company, you can see how you're improving or you're not improving over time. So these industry benchmarks play a crucial role for evaluating your competitiveness. Okay, so improving your cash conversion cycle. So we talked about how to measure it, and we've spoken about the importance of it. Every day makes a big difference because over time, those days add up, and that's where your cash comes from. Each turn ensures that you're able to get your profitability a little quicker. So the number one thing is starting with good data, because if you are, as the quote said by Peter Drucker, if you don't measure it, you can't effectively manage it. So you want to start with good data. And one of the benefits from moving from paper to electronic systems is, apart from just reducing your man hours or reducing your costs associated with it, is also reducing the error rate that happens in tracking that data. From an inventory perspective, it's what you can focus on measuring and tracking your manufacturing processes. How long is your machine being used? Can you improve the operations of your machinery? Is there any waste in your process? There are other more specific software solutions that can be individual, can be very specific to your particular company. If you are an assembler with many complex parts, you might find that inventory management is really crucial to you to make sure that you're ordering your parts at the right time. If you make highly variable parts, it's important to schedule your production flow so that you are utilizing all your assets effectively, and none of your machines are being sitting around idle. So just going into some of those tactics and technologies in days inventory, as we measured, there are three components of it: your raw materials, work in process, and finished goods. So ideally, you'd be able to get your raw materials in smaller quantities and coming just before you start the production process. So the longer you're holding on to the raw material, the longer your cash is tied up in your cash conversion cycle, more days inventory that you have. Scheduling, especially in high mix, low volume environments, it's prime to see your machines sit idle. Scheduling can play a really important role, and there are scheduling softwares that can help companies as well. Similarly, there are other systems such as manufacturing execution system, which looks at your production floor and is able to come up with different kinds of individual solutions of tracking your inventory. It even have features such as serial lot tracking in case you need to. In some instances, for example, in the defense sector, it's important to measure or track a particular raw material part right from where it's sourced to where it's going. There's automated defect detection, which is using vision systems. So there are cases where currently individuals are using the human eye to look at defects, surface defects in a metal part. There are AI technologies that can speed up that process and reduce the human error rate. So there are a series of technologies, and I think it's just about constantly going out there and looking at your existing systems, at your existing ERP systems, or your existing MES systems, and saying, are you using all the different features in it? Can you improve the use that you're getting out of your existing systems as well? In terms of days receivable, I think the number one thing to start with is, is there somebody responsible within your organization to collect payments from customers? Because if there's somebody not completely responsible or just taking responsibility on a part-time basis, you're missing out on collecting your receipts from your customers at the right time. ERP systems can help create different kinds of improve the efficiency of your accounts, of your receivables planning. You can create an accounts receivable aging report to see which of your customers are constantly taking longer time and trying to stretch their payables from your perspective. Just as you have the option to stretch payables, so do your customers have the option to stretch payables amongst you. So managing those relationships, next slide, Parker, is important because you'll see in days payable as well. Some of the tactics that larger companies use. Can we go to the next slide, Parker?
Actually, Vikesh, I think you're sharing right now.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
No problem.
I got confused there. Some of the tactics that larger companies use is that they look at all their suppliers and they kind of segment them into different groups. Who are the big guys that we cannot mess with? We need to pay them on time, or else they'll give us really bad rates. Who are the smaller people who are supplying to us for whom we are a big customer and we have the leverage to stretch the time that we take to pay them without affecting our the particular rate that they're giving us and the terms and conditions. So these are tactics that you can also individually use, and there are a good ERP system does allow you to do that and gives you those reports to be able to manage your payables in a more effective manner. Okay. So this is some of the tools and tactics that we spoke about. As we mentioned, we can do a deeper dive, but this is just an example of a report that you might have already received. We can jump into more different metrics for the company in terms of your operating ratios, liquidity ratios, return on assets. For example, are you generating the right amount of sales for how much assets you have in your company and comparing that to industry peers? And we can also look at debt metrics to see are you more leveraged or not than your company? Because in the long run, the less leveraged companies or the accurately leveraged companies are well positioned to maximize their gains in the company. Great. So I think we do have some time for any questions that you'll want to discuss.
I sent one in. I'm just when there's volume discounts offered, how do you measure taking advantage of volume discounts versus, I mean, if you order more than you really need, but you get quite a discount, and holding on to that inventory longer than you should, how do you measure that?
Well, I think that, so I believe that can be compared by an A/B comparison. You do both. You simulate both environments in your cash sheet, and you look at your profitability as well in both environments, and then you can get a good look at what that looks like.
Okay.
The thing that came to my mind, and we've talked about this, Vikesh, is, and I've experienced it even more so since we met, is the shortage in labor. And for us, we found that we were preparing for growth, and it takes a lot of the people that you get in don't work out. So there's this huge turnover, but we ended up building a labor force even amidst the difficult times, but then the sales didn't increase at the level we had anticipated. So now we have extra labor, but you don't want to let that labor go. So how do you really measure? I know one of the conversations I had with my plant manager just last week was he had ran some parts that we aren't going to need for a while. And I'm like, what are you doing? And he says, well, either that or I send them home. And if I send them home, they're not going to be happy and they're not going to work for us. So how do you really balance trying to keep a labor force versus not stocking more inventory than you need in today's economy?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because the situation that we showed here is it assumes that the company can keep growing at that particular constant rate and keep funding itself and at the same rate, but sometimes the market might not have that kind of demand.
Right.
And so then you're having to decide or make the hard choices here from a strategy standpoint of which particular option has more risk for you. Is it in the long run? Is it holding on to your employees for a period of 6 months, or doesn't just increasing your employee retention more valuable to you than holding on to inventory, which also has a cost associated with it.
Right.
Yeah, I think one way to measure the cost of inventory is just look at the interest rate that you pay for short-term loans. Just look at your inventory, and you can say, hey, if this wasn't in my inventory and if I have this on cash, I could save that much on interest. And is that worth
well,
it?
we're not operating on any loans, so we don't have any interest to have to deal with. So we've made the choice to bank inventory that historically I would have never made that kind of choice. But with the labor shortages, that's just, if we can produce it, we know we're going to sell it. I mean, of course, in our industry, we're not manufacturing, we're serving the manufacturers. So we know that they're going to buy those materials. It's just, we're going to have to hang on to it for a bit.
We're in the other situation where we are a manufacturer, so we're buying more inventory to build machines that we don't have orders for. But some of the situation with parts, 3-4 years ago, a part could take 3 to 5 weeks. It's now 7 to 9 months. So I'm buying inventory for something I've never even thought about even trying to sell yet. So we're in the same boat, but in a different realm of it, because if I don't have the parts here, when I do get an order, I can't build it anyway. So it's going to be 6 months out before I can finish that project. I might lose the project. So we're bulking them on our inventory for that reason. It's definitely not easy.
That's a really challenging environment, especially when you have a high variety of raw materials. Yeah. Great thoughts. Yeah, I hope this was helpful. I know Stephanie is going to just drop out a poll here for you. So we have shared this sheet that you can download, but I believe the RMA sheet that we've shared with you goes in a little bit more detail, looks at all the different ratios as well from a financial perspective, and it can be updated every year. So we probably looked at the last 3 years financials for each of your company and looked at those and compared it with an industry peer. Though in some cases the industry comparisons are better than the others, because as you may know, the NAICS comparison is all the companies who are classified in your NAICS code may not be doing similar operating activities as you are doing. So just look at that information with a grain of salt. But you can still look at your individual company's trends over time in that sheet.
Well, and I think for me, if you look at the metrics, at least you know you're making conscious choices. This isn't just we're not paying attention to it, and this is just the results. If we're intentionally building inventory because we know for the labor issues, then we can say, you know what, we made this choice. We all take risks in this kind of economy, especially not being able to predict the future.
That's a very true statement, because there are companies that don't effectively measure it on a regular basis, see that their inventory just slowly starts to accumulate over time. And that is certainly not a good thing as well. You need to look at which of your inventory is just sitting around and not been used for 12 to 18 months, and then it starts to become a drain on your company.
Well, the data for me gives me, we're looking at an MES. Because getting a more a quicker and more accurate inventory valuation is what we're really striving for. And to make that decision to build out more of this versus getting creative. One of the things I had talked to my plant manager was, can't you see if somebody wants to take a voluntary vacation this week? Or, if you know that the orders are slow this week, instead of building stuff we don't need, are there other things we can do? And having the data and being able to show the team those things, I think will be definitely a useful tool to say, okay, let's make a more educated decision instead of just guessing.
Absolutely. And I'll follow up with you right after this, Tammy, just to talk about the progress of that
Be
project.
great.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions and if you want additional data or anything that we can help you with, I believe all of you do have my contact information and should be available through email.
Thank you.
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks.